kind of a difficult talk to give, I think, because you're all coming from different disciplines. You're going to be asked to engage in kind of different types of writing, certainly different amounts of writing. And I also am a firm believer that your writing processes are going to be different. Writing processes are as individuated as the number of people in this room. So it's sort of hard for me to, and I think a lot of like learning to write well is figuring out what actually works for you, right? So it's hard for me to sort of, give sort of helpful advice on writing sustainably without turning it into like a bunch of empty platitudes, right? A lot of like, oh, you can do it, right? So I'm going to try to not do that. But the bottom line, the only thing I can really say is that look, writing is hard, right? It's writing your dissertation, even your proposal. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be fast, and it's not going to be linear, right? There's just no way around this. I think we all have this fantasy of, as we kind of heard earlier, kind of putting our noses to the grindstone, and the pages will just pour magically out of us. That's what we all want to happen, right? And that our dissertation is going to be original and important and the sum of everything that we've learned here at CGU. And it's going to be this kind of perfect masterpiece that springs forth like Athena from the head of Zeus, fully formed. None of that's true, right? This is a complex process, and if we kind of go into it, I entertain that fantasy in my more halcyon moments, but the reality is much different. So the best I can hope for today is to offer you some basic principles that can help you structure your time, stay sane, and get back on track when you struggle. And I've tried to break it down into 4 maxims that I think are pretty representative. Make a mess, find your groove, forgive yourself, and don't go it alone. And we've heard some of these themes through the day, but I'll try to explain what I mean by them sort of when we think about writing specifically and kind of thinking about your writing process. So let's start with the first one, making a mess. This certainly goes with the idea that writing is hard and that it's not a linear process. I think most of you anticipate this. You have to do a lot of investigating and exploring. You have to make a lot of false starts. You have to go down blind alleys and back out of them again, right? It's not just like I have a topic, I'm going to research that topic, and then I'm going to write. It just doesn't work that way. So ultimately what we're working towards is a process where you're going to make a mess and then eventually you're going to clean it up. And I think that that orientation towards process is really important because it means thinking about writing as an activity, not just the last thing you do, but the part of the process of discovery itself, right? I think we often want to think like, oh, we sort of discover knowledge and then we write it down. No, I think what I'm suggesting today is that writing is actually part of the process of inquiry itself. In composition, we make the distinction between learning to write and writing to learn. This is definitely the latter, right? And so you're using the medium that you have as the medium that your finished product is going to be in as a way of exploring ideas and solving problems. But doing things that way means that your writing is going to be messy. You may start with a simple sketch, a doodle, a rough idea in a notebook. Maybe you fill it in a little bit, gets a little more complex, you add some detail, maybe you take a different approach altogether. Maybe you then abandon that, go back to try something else. You build up that new style, and then you rework it until you have something that's pretty amazing, right? So it's not linear. And opening yourself up to making a mess with your writing can be useful for you at different stages in the writing process. Starting, I think, really in a lot of what we call kind of pre-writing steps. The sort of inquiry, even before you've selected a topic. And I think in the process of topic selection, it's, this idea of messiness really helps a lot. Because the most important thing in choosing a topic area, and notice I didn't say an argument or thesis, right? We're nowhere near that. Even a research question, right? But something we heard earlier today the single most important thing is that you be interested in what you do, right? You have to be interested in your topic. That sounds really obvious, but if you're not, it won't hold your attention through the tough times. I'll be honest, I'm not a firm believer that you should work on the thing that you're most passionate about. My advisor actually set out to write a dissertation on James Joyce's Ulysses, and he kind of got into it and then eventually switched to writing about Joyce's last novel, Finnegan's Wake, which it's a mess. It's a wonderful book, but it's a mess. He wasn't nearly as interested in Finnegan's Wake as he was in Ulysses, but it made for a better dissertation, and it eventually turned into a book that's like the most important book ever written on Finnegan's Wake. So he was interested, but it wasn't like this was his passion project. I think you have to have that kind of intense interest, but I'm not convinced it has to be your top priority. Sometimes that can lead to kind of myopia, right? You have a hard time of seeing your way outside of your own project. But being interested rather actually shows in the work itself. As someone who's read a lot of student work over the years, I can tell the difference between when a student is engaged in what they're writing and when they're not. And remember, with dissertations, this is something you are going to be talking about with colleagues for years, right? Like at conferences, perhaps with employers. If it's not interesting, you won't present it as interesting. So engagement is the first thing. But, and let's say you don't know what's interesting to you. And believe me, I see students in the Writing Center for whom this is the case. They sort of don't, they're at that point of like, okay, what now? And they kind of don't know what to do with actually kind of crafting a topic area. One place to start is just by rereading your own work. Looking at papers that you've written, maybe presentations you've given, a project that you worked on that's particularly memorable. Look for threads that run through them. Maybe there are common themes, common topics, common methodologies that you find yourself veering to. You may not be aware of, right? The distance of a couple of years can make a world of difference in how you see your own work. Kind of being a reader of your own work is really helpful in that regard, but maybe also look for the things you didn't pursue, right? Oh yeah, I ended up writing that paper about Finnegan's Wake. I really wanted to write about Ulysses. And maybe there are the kind of unrealized possibilities that now is a time that you can come back to them, right? We talked earlier about that idea of sort of the projects that we put off. The dissertation might be one of those projects itself. Of course, talk with your committee about this. This came up in the morning session. I think not so much for the idea of giving you a topic, but certainly giving you the lay of the land for the topic that you're considering. As we talked about this morning, there may be political issues. There may be kind of you're aligning yourself with a certain camp of scholars, right? And so being aware of the implications of those decisions is something that your advisors are just in a much better position to help with. Right, so kind of getting their feedback. I certainly am not a believer that anyone should have a dissertation topic foisted upon them, but certainly that that level of input is helpful. I think at the end of the day, there's very little to substitute from the fact that you're going to have to do a fair amount of exploring on your own, right? It's kind of, it seems pretty obvious. But one of the best ways to do that might be just to read casually in one or two kind of major journals in your field. Oftentimes they're the kind I know I belong to a number of professional societies where part of the membership is a journal subscription. So there's 4 or 5, quarterlies that come to my house, and not a bad way to sort of just start seeing what people are interested in, right? And how they're interested in. I've learned a lot about literary study just from reading that kind of stuff. So that kind of casual reading is actually an important part of the process. But I think it's important to not just read passively. At this early stage that I'm talking about, this kind of moment of just discovery and kind of figuring out what's interesting, one of the most important things you can do is to keep a research journal. There are a lot of ways to do this. It doesn't have to be neat. The whole point is we're making a mess. There are a lot of ways you can do this. Certainly, you have access to the Office 365 suite. with CGU. Those will do just fine. Some people really like Evernote. I know they're kind of committed to it. But honestly, like a notebook and a pen will do just fine at this stage in the game. Because again, and I'm a believer in that. I think there's a good reason at this stage in thinking about a project to work on paper. Paper actually facilitates our ability to take risks and to venture guesses in ways that digital media don't. And this is, I kind of find this fascinating. A few years back, a couple of sociologists did this. They observed that, this was in like 2005 or so, they observed that here we are in the information age, and they actually noticed that the office use of paper had gone way up, right? The internet was supposed to be the end of paper. And instead, offices were using more paper than ever before. And so they asked, well, why is that, right? What's going on? And so they looked at how people actually were using paper. And what they found was that paper afforded users ways to think in non-linearly, right? If you're a person who makes piles, you will know this, right? That your desk may have a kind of organization to it that may not be apparent to anyone else. I think it's a way of physically rearranging things, of visualizing information, which is sort of very important to me. I'm a very visual learner. What they found was that people wanted to take notes in the margins, and it felt like less of a commitment than writing something in a Word document, right? And that's weird, but I think it's a kind of real, psychological phenomenon that we engage in. And so, the idea of keeping a journal in just a tattered old notebook that you always have with you is really not that bad an idea. But if you want to work digitally, knock yourself out. However you decide to keep a journal, a research journal, I would suggest that there are two different kinds of notes that one can keep in it. One are just reading notes, right? Whenever, and this is, I sort of just took something from deep in a file. Whenever you read an article or a book or something, write a summary of it. If you're in fields where textual analysis is more important, writing down, including key passages is really useful, because then you have them later to refer back to, and you don't need to go digging through your books. I think that's really useful. I'll be honest with you guys. I'm at this point right now with a project where I've read a ton and have refused to do exactly this. I now have a pile of books that's yay high that it's going to take months for me to go back and kind of reconstruct all the notes on this. And it's just because I was kind of reading casually and not really paying attention. So don't be like me, I guess is the advice here. The other kind of notes that I think can be really useful in this stage is just kind of writing down questions and hunches, ideas that you have. Maybe you're thoughts you're having about topics, potential research questions, responses to what you're reading. You may read an article and then just start kind of journaling about it, right? Or there might even be kind of test formulations for arguments, right? Kind of trying out phrases. Again, this is all the pre-writing, right? This is all the mess. So there's no reason to hold yourself back. And the organization doesn't really matter, because you'll come back to it later and clean it up later on. I think this technique is also kind of handy when it'll come in handy later on as you start writing, and at that point your research journal can start turning into a writing journal. And what do I mean by that? Well, one of the, as we kind of heard this morning, one of the keys to surviving your dissertation is building up your writing tolerance, I suppose, is the way of putting it. Actually, how many of you feel really uncomfortable writing? Yeah, right? That's about right. That seems about right. And so kind of getting used to it, demystifying it, learning to write without hesitation and kind of in the time available to you is a learned skill. It's something that you can develop. And one of the best ways to do this is through what we call free writing, right? So it's just writing about, it's not nothing, but kind of writing without a lot of topics. The principle is really simple. Set down to write for 10 minutes. You can do anything for 10 minutes, right? You can do something terribly unpleasant for 10 minutes. So if writing is terribly unpleasant. And write about anything related to your dissertation, topic, whatever, that comes to mind. You know, in the words of the composition scholar Peter Elbow, the key is just mostly that you don't stop. Don't get hung up on grammar, correctness, technical jargon. If you don't know a word, just write through it, right? I don't know a word, I don't know the word. The point is just to get used to the activity of writing and let it become part of what you do. If you can sit in the chair for 10 minutes, then you can sit in the chair for 15 minutes, right? And you eventually kind of build up that tolerance. So this kind of just, you know, free writing journaling gets you into, you know, into the habit of writing. I certainly want to believe it's something that needs to be demystified, that it shouldn't be onerous. I'm not necessarily committed to the proposition that you need to do it for 3 or 4 hour stretches at a time. It's part of figuring out your process and depending on your kind of life habits, right? You may or may not need more or less time. But you know, I think there's another function here, which is that you can find some of your best ideas through this kind of free writing. If you let your mind go, this is, and you know, by the way, I mean a lot of this talk I'm kind of cribbing from this book by Joan Bolker called Writing Your Dissertation in 15 Minutes a Day. It's worth picking up. It's, you know, $15. And you know, her claim is that by doing this, you can dig through your mess later and you can find some genuinely good ideas that you otherwise might not have found, right? That if you're thinking in these kind of very linear ways, you're not going to encounter some of these ideas. But this is, you know, this is kind of like systems theory approach, right? Systems theorists talk about this idea of emergence, the idea that a group of discrete objects can add up to something that's greater than their sum. So pointillist art, you know, that kind of stuff. And so you may see a kind of unity to what you're doing that you know that you otherwise wouldn't. I think in the early stages of a project, you know, I just don't want you guys to get like hung up and weird and nervous, right? I see a lot of students that just, this is like so anxiety ridden, and anytime they sit down to write, they feel like they're performing. And like, that's awful, right? Like that's not how this should be, and I certainly would hope that you don't imagine a life where that's the thing that you're doing. And so, you know, I think I'm trying to suggest like there are ways we can make writing more playful and just more ordinary. And if you can get to that point by just writing a little bit and building up over time, you can take some of that energy out of it and it just becomes part of what you do. I actually get really frustrated by the notion, it's a bit of a digression, but bear with me. I get really frustrated by the notion, which again I encounter quite frequently here, that writing is somehow otherwise than the knowledge that you are producing. It's not. Every discipline at this university writes. That's the currency. So this is like, and I think it's more than a skill, right? I think it's actually a mode of knowing. If that's the case, then this has to be part of your habitus, right? Your way in the world. If it's not, like, then it's just always going to be this kind of skill, this kind of prosthetic thing that's added on to your process of inquiry, and that just feels so like unnatural, right? So if just like sitting down with a journal or your laptop and just playing with your writing can help break that anxiety, I think it's worthwhile. If you start with, oh sorry, I got ahead of myself. If you start with these kind of just real free writing, where you're just kind of letting yourself go wherever your mind goes that day, later on, as you actually start producing pages and start feeling more comfortable with the writing process, you can give yourself what we call focused but still sloppy tasks. So, you know, things where you still have some room to play, but you know, things like, you might ask yourself, well, what's bothering me about this chapter? Right? It's focused, but it could go in a million different directions. That seems like, you know, kind of a useful free writing task where you may be solving problems as you work through it. You build up that kind of comfort with writing, and you feel better. There's very little I can say about what you're trying to accomplish in the early stages of dissertation research, even when you're writing a proposal. In part, that's because, like, I mean, the requirements for a proposal vary a lot from department to department. They serve different functions in relation to the kind of product that you're ultimately producing. But I will say, with some confidence, that basically every dissertation proposal, and this carries into actual dissertation work, is trying to accomplish the same rhetorical objective. There are like, I think like 3 lessons in rhetoric that I just teach over and over here. This is like 1.5. And we call this creating a research space. In the writing center, we just call it CARS. This is such a kind of common thing for us that we have a shorthand for it. It breaks down into 3 distinct rhetorical moves. The first one, establishing your territory. Why is the problem, question, topic that you're interested in important? This is the dreaded "so what" question, right? Why should anyone care? So I went looking one time for examples of irrelevant scholarly work. Right? And I had heard about this apocryphal study of the distribution of caffeine in a coffee pot. Right, that some chemist somewhere had done that published this thing. This seemed like perfectly irrelevant work. I couldn't find it, but I did find an article on the distribution of caffeine in coffee grounds. And sure enough, at the beginning they're like, this has major implications for like bacteria, because caffeine is like apparently heavily antibacterial. The first thing they do is like, here's why our stupid study of coffee grounds is important. Right? The first move is always the same. Most journal articles that you read will start with this claim. It is uncanny if you go looking for it. The second move is what we call establishing a niche. The metaphor is from biology. I think this has kind of breaks down into like, what are other scholars in the field saying about your problem or your topic? This is what we call the they say, I say model of writing. Any argument you make, any argument I say, only gets its meaning in relation to what they have said, right? What other people have said. So you need to know what's the scholarly conversation that's going on, and more importantly, what's wrong with what they have said, right? What's missing, what's overlooked, what's just, incorrect. Why, or what can we build on? I should say that too. It can be kind of a positive move. And then the third move is to occupy the niche. Hence our little clownfish friend here, right? How are you going to fill that gap in the scholarship? That's the question that you're trying to answer. And what are you going to argue, right? And how are you going to demonstrate it? Fundamentally, if you can like figure this out, the rest of it's kind of QED. I mean, answering these questions gives you this incredible sense of trajectory, right? Like all of the major pieces of a dissertation are actually here. Literature review, critique, argument, methodology, right? Like it all kind of lays itself out if you can sort through this basic structure. And I should say, I like models of writing that are not static. I think that people have a tendency to think about particularly large projects like a dissertation in kind of structural terms. Well, chapter 2 is my literature review, then chapter 3 is my methodology, right? They're these kind of just static pieces. I prefer things that have a kind of like motility or direction to them, and this is a way of creating momentum, right? This has force. That all of the rest may be true. Chapter 2 may still be your literature review, right? But now you have objectives. Oftentimes students tend to think about what they're doing as descriptive, and it's never descriptive, it's argumentative. This is how you get to an argument. So working this out is kind of the most, I think, important thing for a proposal, or maybe after a proposal, right? It will give you that kind of structure, and that kind of direction. So that's making a mess. My second piece of advice for you is to find your groove. And here, I think the metaphor is again useful. By groove, I mean both like the groove of a record, right? A well-worn path, right? The cultivation of habit. But also grooving, finding your swing, your rhythm, right? So you can dance, maybe have a little fun with this. Because again, if it's miserable, it's just going to be miserable. So it's about kind of cultivating the habits of, of just, integrating this very strange undertaking into your life. I think it starts with attending to your own habits, which is to say, kind of figuring out what works and what doesn't work for you. Do you work better at home, or on campus, or at a coffee shop, or in the library, right? Where is your place where you feel good? Is there a time of day when you write better than others? Are there particular, for beverages that you need to have with you? There, particular tea that you find soothing that makes this process more enjoyable? By all means, right? Paying attention to those kind of things is really important. I mean, for instance, in my life, at different times, I've been an early morning writer, like get up at, be like sort of bleary-eyed, but just really focused at 7 in the morning, and it all works really well. Other times I've been it's like late at night, right? I used to write at home. Now I write mostly here in my office. I don't know, these habits change, right? But if you don't attend to them, and think about what they are, you can feel a little sort of out of sorts. I think it's also important to pay attention to what distracts you, how you waste time, and I'm not going to I don't think that means then you abandon those things from your life. I think it's just that. Okay, I think that procrastination is probably inevitable. We're all going to do it. The question is, sort of what power does it have over us? So, again, personal story. I couldn't write for 2 years during graduate school. Just terrible writer's block. I was in therapy for it. It was I would just find myself sort of being distracted by all these kind of side tasks. And the answer wasn't to chastise myself and pretend that I could bootstrap myself out of it, I'm looking at Facebook, I can't do that, right? No, it wasn't the answer. It was actually to pay attention to how I felt when I was distracted, right? Oh, I'm wasting time right now. How does that feel? Because right, with distraction, we're trying to get away from something, usually a feeling, usually anxiety. And so kind of inhabiting that actually helped me kind of get past it. So attending, being mindful to your distraction is a way that you can help to sort of let it lose its power, right? But it will happen. I just don't think anyone does any good by sort of, just beating themselves up for it, and I'll come back to that. But I think you also need to be willing to change your habits if they're not working. Even if you've always been a morning writer and suddenly your mornings don't seem that productive, maybe it's time to try something else. Try a different time of day. Get out of the house. That one is really important for me. I used to work at home. I started going to the library one summer, and it was whatever it takes to make writing feel novel, to feel new. And I mean, by way of analogy, I really enjoy this story. Back in 2003, there was this group of penguins in the San Francisco Zoo, and they had grown quite comfortable with their penguin existences. They just kind of hung out, waited to get fed, right? They were bored. The zoo introduced these 6 Magellanic penguins that they had gotten from a zoo in Ohio, and suddenly 6 penguins in a group now of 50. Suddenly, all of the penguins every day started swimming in a circle, right? All day, every day, until they kind of got tired at night and waddled out and went to sleep. They thought they were migrating to the North Pole, right? But these 6 penguins, they had just one little variable in their life changed, and it gave them a sense of purpose. Even if it's kind of futile and a little sad that they were just swimming in circles, nonetheless, right? It kind of gave them a new sense of direction. So sometimes just changing one thing in your environment can do a world of good to just kind of make the process feel new again. And so, I'm a big believer in doing that kind of thing. So the second, kind of major task is just to build new writing habits. And to talk about that, I want to draw a little bit on what's called something about how we learn new behaviors. Drawing on kind of social learning theory as it was put forth by Albert Bandura, who used to be a professor at Santa Barbara. And he claimed that we learn things not just through inner drives, right, but actually through our interactions with our environment. So that breaks down into some individual components, right? How does it feel to do X, Y, or Z? Some of those things are affective. How does our body feel? Some of it's just personal experience. Oh, I've done that before. I know I can do it again. But others involve kind of the modeling of others, right? Watching what people do, other people do things, or getting support from other people. And I'm going to suggest strategies for addressing both those kind of individual and those social concerns. On the individual side, I think the key is to building up new writing habits. And I take this maxim from the poet Ruth Whitman. She says, write first. So what does that mean? Well, it doesn't have to mean that you write first thing in the morning. If that works for you, great. But it does mean that writing your dissertation needs to be your top priority. You've heard this, right? Again, I'm not saying anything you didn't hear earlier in the day. It needs to be your top priority. There will always be something more pressing, less anxiety producing, more enjoyable than writing your dissertation. But this is why you are here, and is why you have made it this far. And to sort of not if you can't give your dissertation the best part of your mental energy in the day, this process is going to be really onerous and tiresome, if not impossible. There's no way around that. I think it also means building up that kind of focused writing time from free writing, getting comfortable with sitting and writing. And I think journaling can be a good way to do that. It also means writing every day, and I've put every in quotation marks here because you can decide what every means to you. Maybe it means 7 days a week, maybe it means 5, maybe it means every other day. Whatever fits with the rest of your life that you can count as every day, more power to you. But the key is that you stick with it. Right? If you set a rule for yourself, kind of once you find your routine, I think that's important, right? Kind of figuring out what works. Once you've got to stick to your own rules, because if you break them on one day, it becomes a lot easier to break them on the next day. Right? I mean, again, anyone who's dieted or done sort of exercise regimes knows this to be the case. Tried to quit smoking, right? This is the case. So, kind of sticking to your own rules seems like an important part of this. And I would also recommend that you set benchmarks in terms of number of pages. People have when they're talking about okay, I'm going to sit down every day and write. They'll tend to go in 1 3. I'm going to do it for X amount of time. I'm going to do it until X number of good ideas come out of me, or until I produce X number of pages. Now, I think the pages thing works the best. If you're okay, I've got a 3-hour writing block, figure out about what that is in terms of pages you can produce. Again, they don't have to be good. They just, writing fast doesn't seem to produce better or worse work than writing slowly. So, actually, at least at this drafting stage in the game. Figuring out okay, I can write, about 3.5 pages in, 2 hours. Great, cool. You've got then kind of a benchmark that you can use. You can set that as kind of your daily objective. My dissertation advisor actually, he was in a situation where his advisor was retiring, so he had to finish on kind of a fixed schedule, and he kind of marked it all out. He said, I have to write 2 pages every day. And he was at Irvine at the time. And so sometimes those 2 pages would take him an hour, and he could go surfing for the rest of the day. Other times it would take 12 hours, right? That may be the more kind of painstaking way of getting at this, but if you kind of set those page goals for yourself, you can make this sort of much more palatable. And the point here is to get this into a routine. Are there any runners in the room? People who run? I don't. My wife does, and she tells me that this is kind of the idea of a runner's high. Every time she goes running, she says the first mile is just absolutely miserable. You're like, why am I doing this? Is this true? Do you feel this way? Right? Like, I'm short of breath. It doesn't matter how often I've done this or whatever. Eventually, you hit your stride. You start feeling good, and then when everything's really working, you actually feel like you're kind of being carried along, right? That you're no longer doing the work. You're just kind of moving on your own. And so I think a good writing groove should get you to that same place. But that first mile is still going to be kind of painful. So once you've found a groove, what can you do to keep it up? I'll make a couple of suggestions. The first, park downhill, as they say. Don't create a lot of barriers to starting back up again the next time you sit down to write. So if you have an idea, write it down. Don't count on yourself to remember it. The amount of stuff that I've forgotten lost over the years is kind of mind-boggling. So write down ideas. Also, leave yourself instructions for where to pick up. Like, whenever I stop writing, I'll kind of be like, okay, next paragraph is about, right, da-da-da-da-da, right? So I don't have to go back and reread a lot. So next time I sit down, I can get right back into that groove. Very simple things, but like worth doing. It's very easy to not do it, and over time it will actually make a difference. The other thing is just to reward yourself for actually accomplishing things. I think you can give yourself little rewards when you reach certain, even mini milestones. Okay, after I finish this paragraph, I'm going to go have a piece of chocolate, or for me, it'd be like I'm going to go play video games for 15 minutes. Whatever, just little things to kind of reward yourself and keep the process enjoyable. Also, delaying gratification until you reach certain milestones. Like, I'm not going to do X until I finish, right? I'm not going to go, I'm not going to go out and meet my friends until I finish this page. I'm not going to, check Facebook until I'm, done with X, Y, or Z. Like, this is, it's very Pavlovian, right? This is, kind of behavioral science 101. So giving yourself those kinds of things can help these habits just become a natural part of how you're working. I'm also going to make a brief pitch for knowledge management. Get your knowledge management situation figured out. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. You are going to be dealing with a lot of documents, both yours and other people's. You need a way to organize them. Assuming you are not entirely working on paper, take the time to try out some of the options available to you and settle on tools you can use effectively. Doing this early is honestly one of the best moves you can make in an early stage, just because it's just learning to use tools. What I mean by that, I see two areas where this is really important. One is sort of working with journal articles. We have Mendeley, Zotero. I use a tool called Papers as a kind of iTunes-like interface. It's pretty cool. And relatively cheap. And then also for organizing your notes. A system of document tagging could do this, but again, so could OneNote or Evernote. You need to be able to access information quickly, and if you are not working entirely on paper, having a good workflow and system for this is absolutely crucial. And I'm belaboring this point because I feel like I got to this too late, and maybe that was also just sort of, I kind of worked on the transition between kind of more paper-based scholarship and more digitally based scholarship. And the last time I moved, I digitized a whole file cabinet full of old articles I had Xeroxed, right? And you're never again. So I had to figure this out kind of later in the game. My advice to you is do it now. And because it's just worth it. And then once you have a workflow, the rest of it kind of becomes easy.
Mark,
yes?
Do you have any resources or suggestions for managing that workflow? Because this is the part that I'm stuck in, is I've got 500 papers and papers, and then I read something and go, oh, that sounds really good. And then I get traveling down 5 different rabbit holes and never remember where I started at.
It sounds like you need, sort of either kind of notes or a lot of meta tagging and
or just a strategy or some kind of system.
Yeah, no, and you're right, it's hard. For me, it's turning things I read into notes about things I read and then working off the notes. and then being able to tag those and cluster them, and and in the chunks that I need them. But there's no right answer to this. I mean, and I don't think I wouldn't say go too far down this rabbit hole, because I mean, you could get into project management, right? Like, I mean, this could be sort of bottomless. I tried that for a while. I tried to have nonlinear organizational systems like the brain, right? Things which allow you to kind of, think in nonlinear. I never stuck with it. So, yeah, but I mean, to me, it's like all happening kind of in the notes, but that's just me. So I'm sorry I don't have a more satisfying answer. But I feel like if you can kind of work out these pieces, you're at least ahead of the game, right? It's better than having a pile. But no. My last 2 points go pretty quick. As I said, the third thing I can offer you is to forgive yourself. If we all kind of nurture this bootstrapping fantasy, putting our nose to the grindstone, the unadulterated genius pouring out of us, as we said, it's simply not true, but we're still going to nurture that fantasy. For the best of us, this process is sloppy, tiresome, it's frustrating, it's riddled with setbacks, missed opportunities, and failures, right? Just things that we straight up mess. And the only way to really get past that is to learn to let go, and to not, beat yourself up for these things. I have a couple of suggestions. One is to set modest goals. If you set for yourself daily goals that are impossible to attain, you're just setting yourself up for failure. So imagine what you think you can accomplish in a day, then cut it in half. And that might be a reasonable place to start with a daily goal. But and I would say give yourself what you can get done in 3 or 4 hours. I talk to a lot of people, I have a lot of friends who are academics. A good work day has 3 or 4 hours of work in it. It's not 8, it's not 10, right? It's like if you can do 3 or 4 hours of work, you can hold your head up high and go on with your life, right? And not feel guilty about it. It's kind of the way it is. I think it's also really important to distinguish between goals and tasks. This is something I've been harping on if any of you have come to Dissertation Bootcamp. We see this at Dissertation Bootcamp all the time. Students come in with these goals like finish chapter 3, but they have no sense of what that means, right? What do I need to do to finish chapter 3? That's the end, but how are you going to get there? I think you need to break your goals down not into milestones, right? Not into the endpoints, but into the activities that you need to undertake them. So that finish chapter 3 might mean that you need to review a section where you are having second thoughts. Incorporate that new source you just found the other day, right? Deal with that difficult objection that your advisor gave you. And then walk through that thorny section that you just can't get right. It just doesn't feel like it's right? Those are much more focused tasks than finish chapter 3. And I think that that's a more useful way of thinking about what you're trying to accomplish for a couple of reasons. First, it helps you to visualize the work ahead, right? I see people with this kind of I need to finish this chapter, and it's just this kind of empty horizon, right? They have no idea where they're headed, right? Whereas the whole point is to take away a lot of decisions. So if you give yourself these narrowly focused tasks, you don't have to think about anything. It's kind of no brain, no headache, right? But I think they also give you the satisfaction of seeing the progress that you're making, right? And to see what you can actually accomplish. So, let's say you only get through 3 of the 4 writing tasks that you set for yourself. It's not too shabby if you look at it. If I'm using the list on the right, that looks pretty good, right? I feel good. But if I'm using this, I can't even cross that off because I haven't finished the chapter. So it's just not satisfying. If this was my list for the day and I got that far, I'd be like, all right, I'm good. Right? I'm out of time, I'm good. I'm going to go, have dinner with my wife and feel good about it. Whereas if I'm I meant to finish that chapter, then I'll just feel kind of frustrated. The next thing is just to maintain some perspective on your dissertation. Again, I feel like we've heard this. Your dissertation is the most important thing you have written, or that you have written yet, right? I think there's no question about that. It's not the most important thing you will ever write. At the end of the day, a dissertation is an academic assignment. It is subject to certain particular requirements, exists within an institutional context. It may become a book, but it is not a book. And again, you will invariably look back at your dissertation and you will find flaws in it. You will find typos. You'll be embarrassed by the way certain things sound. Or you never want anyone to read your dissertation. And then it takes maybe a year for that feeling to set in. This is a natural part of the process. Let me assure you. And so recognizing that up front, I think is kind of helpful. I had a friend in graduate school. She always referred to her dissertation as her paper. She'd say, I have to go write my paper. Right? A 400-page document. I always found it odd, but she did it because it let it feel manageable, right? That we've all written it. You can write a paper. So, that she was able to keep the scale kind of proportional. It's very easy for this to get away from you. And so, finding ways to keep that perspective, even within an academic context, is important. And the last thing is to prepare yourself for acknowledging that you simply will come up short at times, right? You will fail. There will be days that you meant to write and you just didn't feel like it, you got distracted, you just nibbled around the edges. It's going to happen. Again, this seems sort of obvious, but it's sort of more stultifying than you'd like to believe, or at least was for me. I think it's part of the process, but the best thing is just not to dwell, don't beat yourself up, don't let one day's failure ruin the next day. My favorite author, Samuel Beckett, said, try again, fail better. So letting that be part of your process. You're going to fail at this is really important. My last thing, don't go it alone. Again, you heard this morning. Dissertation writing can be incredibly isolating. There will invariably be dark nights of the soul where you just feel completely isolated in your work. Again, some of that is inevitable, but the bulk of it doesn't have to be that way. Remember, I said earlier, right? Social learning theory says one of the ways we learn new behaviors is by having others who we can model. We see them doing it, or we get encouragement from others. They think we can do it, so we must be able to do it, right? I think getting through a dissertation is definitely done better with others. The single best thing that you can do, it's something I'm trying to push, the single best thing you can do is to form a dissertation writing group. You only need 2 or 3 of your friends who are in roughly the same stage. They don't even need to be in the same discipline. It might be better if they're not. And agree to work together in some fashion. You can write together. I know groups here that physically sit down in the same space and work. Sometimes they can even do it virtually. They'll all put on Skype and just kind of stare at the top of each other's heads while they're working. Or you can just meet to share your work with one another. Remember what Jacob said this morning about kind of Wednesday breakfast, right? Sharing work with a couple people. I think that step is actually really important. That you share your work with people in your group. You pass around chapters. Because it creates accountability, right? One of the hardest parts of this phase is that you don't have deadlines. But if you know that you've got to share a chapter with someone, you're going to get it done, right? You're going to get something to them. You have someone to be accountable to. In graduate school, I was in a group with 2 other guys. We were all writing similar dissertations. We met once a month at a bar. We read someone's chapter. We got together to discuss it. And they're 2 of my closest friends to this day. I think I think this is really invaluable. The Writing Center can help facilitate this. If you come to me with some people that you're like, hey, we want to be in a writing group, we can offer some logistical support. I can set you up with a Canvas page so you know to make file sharing a little easier, make meetings easier. I can even start offering like ways to help moderate sessions of peer review. Get writing consultants involved. I've got a whole kind of package, like a spiel on this. If you are interested, come talk to me. I can offer it at various levels. Or if you just want to do it on your own, knock yourself out. But the point is, we can be here to sort of add some backbone, room reservations, that kind of thing. Absent a writing group, dissertation boot camp is an acceptable option. I'm not a huge fan because I feel like it's a temporary writing group. Right? I'd rather see people have kind of durable relationships with other people that they can share work with. But boot camp is like a writing group for 2 days. You get to kind of commiserate with other people. You get to write together. It feels pretty good. It's always the second weekend of the month. We usually send out the announcement for it around the first of the month. Sign up quick, and then we run a week-long version in the summer. But that one, it misses the peer review part, which, like I said, I think is really crucial. Nonetheless. Good option. Take advantage of it. We see the same people month after month. It would be good to have some fresh faces in there. Of course, did I mention the Writing Center? How many of you have used the Writing Center before? Okay, cool, good. We have students who have worked with like the same writing consultants through their dissertation, right? From proposal to the day they file. And that's really cool. You can build a relationship with a writing consultant who eventually becomes more like a coach. Again, it's a source of accountability, right? Someone who's going to kind of keep you on task, keep you motivated, give you moral support, and who you're going to feel somewhat responsible to. You can make an appointment at the URL on the bottom if you have not used the Writing Center. But this is what we're here for. So please. Finally, let me just make a pitch for you to figure out who your librarian is. The library's website lists all of the research librarians and their areas of specialization. I don't expect you to read this so much as to demonstrate that whatever your field is, there is someone in the library who knows how to research it. And research librarians love working with students. They are so excited if they can come in and help you solve research problems, finding sources or repositories that you might not be aware of, right? Helping you to maximize your research time. They are enthused, and I've heard this from librarians at different institutions for years, that they are underutilized by students. Yeah.
Could you clarify what it means, arts and humanities library?
I have no idea. I literally took this from their webpage. These are clickable links on the library's website, so you can fill in. Yeah.
As a graduate student, we get a semester long circulation class.
Mm-hmm.
When you're writing dissertation, do you get longer?
No, I don't believe you do. This is part of I remember we'd play these recall wars, recalling books from other people, and then they'd recall them from me a week later. Again, this is why photocopiers are wonderful, or buying books you really need. As far as I know, that doesn't change. Schedule an appointment with your librarian. They can talk, and you can talk through your research needs with them. That is about all that I have to say. We have some time for questions. I'm happy to answer the things that I didn't cover. Like I said, I know this is really general, but you may have more particular questions that I can handle in a few minutes. We good?
Dissertation boot camp. Can you talk a little bit more about it in terms of what are your expectations for somebody who wants to come into the boot camp? Because
Sure.
A colleague, peer, BFF of mine told me years ago it was a little bit different than what my very limited experience with it is.
Sure. So, it's a good question. It's immensely popular. It's really butt in chair focused writing time. It's a weekend. So it's a Saturday and a Sunday. Runs from 8:30 in the morning till 4:30 in the afternoon. We require you to be there for the whole thing. There's no kind of coming and going, because the whole idea is you turn off other pieces of your life. We give preference to students who are ABD, but certainly we've generally been able to accommodate the demand month after month. Like very rarely do we have to turn away like a lot of people. The only, I won't say requirement, well it is a requirement. The only requirement is that you be working on a writing task rather than a pre-writing task. So every once in a while people are like, oh, I need to code a bunch of data. Then do that in the library, right? Like it just, you know, because part of it is you're gonna share what you're doing, you're gonna talk through problems with people at lunch. If you're in just kind of like data collection mode or data processing mode, you're not really gonna be able to participate in that group conversation in the same way. So any, you know, this, like I consider, you know, basically outlining on to be like writing tasks. And sort of, but like data collection, note-taking, transcription, pre-writing tasks. And so we ask that you be in the writing task portion, or, you know, and if you're not, then, you know, come back when you are. But yeah, that's it. Like I said, it's very competitive. So when you see that, the announcement, like I said, usually goes out 2 weeks before. I would encourage you to sign up quickly. The summer is also pretty awesome. We do this the second week of June. We do it over at the Grove House at Pitzer, and it's 7 days. Again, you have to attend the whole thing. That is actually a competitive application process. There's a little more involved. You have to get your advisor involved in a little more ways. But it's really awesome. The food is fantastic. I can't, it's just this kind of nice like idle in the middle of June. I don't know, I have a good time at it every year, so. Yeah, that's right.
I heard this, but it may be wrong, not correct. But if you sign up for boot camp and not stick to it and get charged.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, much as, I mean, the SSC has done this with this event, right? It's just to give you some skin in the game. I mean, we don't want your spot to get wasted, right? So yes, if you, and prior to, now we're able to just do it to your student account, and we make you agree to this when you register. We used to like kind of keep checks on file for like you had to give us a deposit check. It's immensely complicated. But yeah, $50 if you bail out. And you know, I don't know, it's reasonable. But given, like I said, we only take 12 students a month. And so, you know, even wasting one of those spots is pretty significant.